And Pierce, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is ANP2, lecture test 4, video 15. I know there are more videos this time, but that's because I'm making them shorter. So there's also a lot of material. So 15, note set page, top of 25. 25, I'll write that down. And again, if yours printed out differently than mine, this is the part I'm looking at. For me, that's top of page 25. For you, it should still say 24-6. The small intestine digests and absorbs nutrients. That's what we're going for. So in the small intestine, the chemical digestion is completed. Chemical digestion, as you may recall, begins in the mouth for both carbs and lipids, but not for proteins. But then in the small and the stomach, then you start the chemical digestion of proteins, continue the chemical digestion of lipids and carbs. In the small intestine, when you add the pancreatic juice and the bile through the major duodenal papilla, you give it all the enzymes it needs to finish the chemical digestion. So, pancreatic juice. In the small intestine, chemical digestion is completed and the nutrients are absorbed. 90% of nutrient absorption takes place in the small intestine, SI. There are 3 parts of the small intestine, which you know from lab. The first part is the duodenum or duodenum. It's about 10 inches long. It functions as a mixing bowl, and the major feature here is the major duodenal papilla and the regional specs. The minor duodenal papilla, the accessory duct, only 10 accessory pancreatic duct. Only 10% of the population actually has an accessory pancreatic duct and a minor duodenal papilla. Department C of redundancy department. Next is the jejunum. It's about 8 feet. And it does chemical digestion and nutrient absorption. And the things we need to know here are the villi and the plicae. The villi are folds of the mucous membrane, and the plicae are folds, bigger folds. It's like the folds have the plicae are folds and the villi are folds on the folds. So the folds have folds. Actually, the plicae are more like folds and the villi are more like fingers. So the folds have fingers. Both increase surface area for absorption. The ileum with an E, as we discussed, is the last 12 feet-ish, curled up and around in there, and it functions in absorption. It has Peyer's patches, which are lymphatic, and the ileocecal valve, which empties the food into the large intestine. This first part of the large intestine is the cecum, so the ileocecal valve is the valve between the small intestine and the large intestine. The blood supply to the small intestines is mainly the superior mesenteric artery and vein, and it runs in between the 2 layers of mesenteries, as I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in these videos before. Okay, so the plicae circularis here is the fold, and you can tell a fold, the plicae, from the, see all the little fingers are the little villi. Fingers are villi. So you see the muscularis mucosa here. If it's bumping up from the muscularis mucosa, it is a villus. If the muscularis mucosa is bumping up from the muscular layer, then it's a plica. And that's how you know. And then the plicae, of course, have villi. So. Draw a cross-section of the small intestine, labeling the plicae, the intestinal villi, the microvilli. Oh, okay. So the microvilli are that these cells that make up the edges have a brush border. So you see this kind of little spot right here? Those are microvilli. That's the brush border on the edge, which again is to increase surface area for absorption, because that's what we do in the small intestine. We absorb nutrients. And the more surface area you have, the more nutrients you can absorb. So if the mucus muscularis mucosa is folded, it's a plique. If it's folded up off of the muscularis mucosa, then it's a villi. And if it's hairs, little fingers on the edge of the cell, then it's a micro. Then they are microvilli. Can't say a microvilli. Villi is plural. A microvillus, which doesn't have the same ring to it, especially if you've been saying villi. Doesn't rhyme. Lacteals. Lacteals are, show up better here. Lacteals are lymph vessels that are run up the center of each villus, just like your bone runs up the center of your finger on the inside in the middle, deepest part. So that's where the lacteal is, because many of the fats that are broken down at this point, but are still too large to enter the capillaries. Instead, they enter the lacteal and go through the lymphatic vessels. And the intestinal crypts are these bits here, these little indents, and they are glands that make intestinal mucus. It's always a good day when you can talk about intestinal mucus. I maintain. Should we see if we can draw that? Let's see if we can draw that. There we go. Okay, a cross section of the small intestine. So we have a plica. And this is the muscularis externa, and this is the submucosa. And then we'll add a line for serosa. Okay. And then the plica has, I didn't say I could draw. I said if I could draw it, all y'all could draw it. I didn't say it'd be a good drawing. I said you could do it too. See the difference? And then on the edge of this, I'm gonna blow this up. This finger is made up of cells. Well, they're columnar cells, so. And now I'm going to draw in the microvilli. Squiggle, squiggle, squiggle. Brush border. It's nice and regular and even in our imaginations. Okay. Villi. Microvilli. Color change. Sounds better when you yell key change, but we're not singing. And green for lacteal. What else do we need to label here? The intestinal crypts. Cyan. like no sound except my mouse clicking. I don't think you can make the mouse not click. Are we going with crypts or glands? I already have crypts started, so. Okay. Let's, while we're here, label this small intestine. Boom. The large intestine, because it doesn't function in absorption primarily, it doesn't function in absorption, doesn't have all of these folds and fold fingers and fingers on folds. Not there, okay? So, and as you recall, the inside of the stomach was also smooth and, of course, covered with a carpet of mucus. Ew. It just gets more disgusting every time you think about it. Like, thanks for that picture. Okay, so intestinal juice, moving right along, is the intestinal gland secretions and osmosis. Next page. The regulation. Omit. Next. The large intestine stores digestive waste and reabsorbs water. So you can see the ileum here, and then the transverse colon, I'm sorry, the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and anus. And this first part of the ascending colon is the cecum. So that's why this is the ileocecal valve, because it's between the ileum and the cecum. So ileocecal valve, and the black lines don't show up very well with the black labels going back to red. Back to red. Okay, anatomy notes. Again, anything, all right, let's do it. The pouches are haustra, 1 haustra, 2 haustrae. The line, the racing stripes here are the taenia coli. It's what little is left of the longitudinal muscle in the large intestine. So it does have large intestine, but just a stripe on the 2 sides, front and back. Ish. Okay. The appendix here is near the ileocecal valve. And it does have immune function. I always ask, well, what's the function of an appendix? And someone usually says to burst. If not, I'll say it. But it does have immune function. There are immune cells, and it does stuff. They think it was like a vestigial stomach, second stomach, because when you eat things that aren't edible, like popcorn kernels, they can build up in there. The problem being, if it gets infected and bursts, you are immediately going to have surgery done. Yay. The regions of large intestine, I already said, ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid is the S-shaped part, rectum, and then, of course, the anus, which isn't technically part of the large intestine, is it? I don't even have rectum on the list. Just the sigmoid. What blood vessels supply the large intestine? And you can see them right here. You've got the superior mesenteric artery, feeds the ascending and maybe some of the transverse, and then I'm in the way. And then the inferior mesenteric artery feeds the descending and the sigmoid. Hemorrhoids are distended veins in the anal canals. Move me out of the anal canals. So distended veins here in the anal canals, and they can fill with blood and be painful. They say preparation H is one of the most stolen items in the grocery store. So. Oh, and that's what the ileocecal valve looks like IRL, and the appendix. In the large intestine, it has no villi, no fingers. Lots of goblet mucus cells. Goblet cells are a single-celled mucus gland. They're the only single-celled glands in the body, and they make intestinal mucus to keep things moving. And lots of intestinal mucus glands. So there are multi-cellular intestinal mucus glands, as well as the goblet cells, which are single-cellular mucus glands. And then we need to talk briefly about this word right here, colon. Colon is a word for like when you've got two dots, one above each other, as opposed to like a semicolon, which is a dot and a comma. So this is a colon, and a large intestine is a colon. What is not a colon is the smelly stuff that makes you run through the men's department in Dillard's, because if you're like me, you're allergic to all of it. So here's how you spell that word. That word is spelled cologne. I keep seeing these Facebook posts where people have put on Facebook, I love the smell of his on my sheets. Okay, no. You don't love the smell of his colon on your sheets. You love the smell of his cologne. And if you do love the smell of his colon on your sheets, that is not a Facebook post. It is private information. On that note, this has been NP2 Lecture Test 4, Video 15. Okay. Oh no, we didn't finish this page. We're going to talk about microbiome and vitamins and pooping. I'm sorry, we still have to talk about pooping. Oh, okay, so you can see here with the histology pictures that there are no microvilli, and you have lots of goblet cells. Look at all those goblet cells. And some intestinal glands. Where are the intestinal glands? Intestinal crypts. There you go. What percentage of absorption takes place in the large intestine? Less than 10%. So most of it is in the small intestine. Where's appendicitis? Did we already talk about appendicitis? Yeah, that was on a previous page. We already talked about that. Okay. And the microbiome are the bacteria in your intestines. So as you may know, you have bad bacteria, pathologic bacteria that make you sick, but also good bacteria. We talked about vitamin K. We talked about vitamin K. There are vitamins that are generated by the bacteria in your gut, and if you don't have the right bacteria in your gut, you will get sick. In fact, in some applications, they will do medical fecal transplants, where they will put a healthy relative's fecal matter, and by that I do mean poop, in your intestines. Because without a healthy microbiome, you're not making all the vitamins that you need, and you're also susceptible to all kinds of different infections like C. diff, which happens after repeated antibiotics, because the antibiotics kill off some of the good bacteria, or all of the good bacteria, kill off good bacteria. In addition to the bad bacteria. Moving on. So, what kind of vitamins? Since we have bullets here. Vitamin K, and the liver uses this to make clotting factors. You eat half of it, and your bacteria make half of it. Biotin is useful for glucose metabolism. It's also in the hair and nail vitamins, so something to do with that. It's one of the B vitamins. And then B5, which is important for steroid hormones and neurotransmitters. Next slide. Mass movements are your daily poop after breakfast. So this would be the biggest poop where like your entire length of your large intestine is working together to get the poop out. And it generally happens after breakfast, which is why I've never understood people eating breakfast on the run after they have left the house, because where are you going to poop? I don't know. And then the defecation reflex, there are stretch receptors in the rectum, and when there's more than 55 millimeters mercury of pressure, you will poop anyway. And in fact, that's how babies poop, is the amount of pressure starts the reflexes. It used to be a defecation reflex, now there's two of them. There's like the long reflex and the short reflex. So, you can poop when it's not your mass movement, but it'll be partial poop because it won't be the entire large intestine working together to get all the poop out at once. So now you know. And again, our tagline for the semester is, so that's why. You're welcome. Sorry, guys. So this has been A&P 2 lecture test 4, still video 15. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. The education must go on. Dr. J out.